Six pregnant women stood at his door, each wearing the same silver pendant he'd buried with his past. Caleb Thornfield hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 years, but now destiny had found him anyway. The first woman stepped forward, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Her dark hair was tied back with a worn ribbon, and her eyes held a determination that made Caleb's chest tighten. She lifted the pendant hanging around her neck, letting it catch the morning light. "You know what this means," she said simply. Caleb gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. The pendant was identical to the one hidden beneath his floorboards, the one he'd sworn never to look at again. His beard had grown wild over the years of isolation, and his clothes were patched and faded, but his eyes remained sharp as steel. "How did you find me?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. The woman behind her, younger with blonde hair and worried eyes, shifted nervously. "We've been searching for months, following the trail you left behind." Caleb's mind raced back to that night 3 years ago, when he'd fled into these mountains, carrying nothing but guilt and that cursed pendant. He'd chosen this remote cabin specifically because no one would think to look for him here. The nearest town was a 2-day ride through treacherous passes. "Whatever you think you know about me," Caleb said, stepping back into the shadows of his doorway, "you're wrong." But the third woman, red-haired with fierce green eyes, laughed bitterly. "Wrong? We're carrying proof of who you really are." She touched her belly, and Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. All 6 women were in different stages of pregnancy, but each wore that same pendant. Each looked at him with a mixture of hope and accusation that made his stomach twist. "I don't know what kind of game this is," Caleb said, his hand moving instinctively to where his gun should be. But he'd stopped wearing it years ago, along with everything else from his old life. The first woman took another step closer. "No games, Caleb. We need your help. All of us." "I can't help anyone," he said quickly. "I'm nobody now, just a man who wants to be left alone." But even as he said the words, Caleb's eyes kept returning to those pendants. They were exactly like his, down to the tiny scratches on the silver surface. Someone had gone to great trouble to find him, and 6 pregnant women didn't travel this far into the wilderness without a desperate reason. The fourth woman, older than the others with streaks of gray in her brown hair, spoke up. "Your brother sent us." Caleb's whole body went rigid. "My brother is dead." "No," she said softly. "He's not, and he's in more trouble than you can imagine." The wind picked up, rustling through the pine trees that surrounded his cabin. Caleb could smell rain coming, and these women looked like they'd been traveling hard. Their dresses were dusty, their faces tired, but none of them showed any sign of backing down. "Even if he were alive," Caleb said, though his voice shook slightly, "I told him I was done with that life, done with all of it." The youngest woman finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you about the fire." Caleb's hand slammed against the doorframe. The fire. The night everything went wrong. The night he'd failed to protect the people who mattered most. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget, but the nightmares still came. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. But his conviction was cracking. The red-haired woman stepped forward boldly. "We know more than you think. We know about the pendant. We know about what happened that night, and we know that without your help, history is about to repeat itself." Caleb stared at the 6 women, his mind spinning. Each pendant caught the light differently, but they were unmistakably real. His brother, if he truly was alive, had found a way to reach him even here in the middle of nowhere. "Why should I believe any of this?" Caleb asked. The first woman reached into her worn leather bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Because of what's written in here, in your brother's handwriting." She held out the letter, and Caleb found himself reaching for it despite every instinct telling him to slam the door and retreat back into his isolation. The paper felt heavy in his hands, heavier than it should have, but as he unfolded it and saw the familiar scrawl, his heart nearly stopped. It was definitely his brother's writing, and the first line made his blood run cold. "The past has found us both, and this time, running won't save anyone." Caleb's hands trembled as he read the rest of his brother's letter. The words blurred together at first, but then the terrible truth became clear. Marcus was alive, but he was trapped in a town called Broken Ridge, surrounded by men who wanted him dead. "They know about the silver mine," Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible. They know everything. The first woman, who had introduced herself as Magnolia, nodded grimly. Your brother discovered something he wasn't supposed to. About the mine, about the pendants, about what really happened the night of the fire. Caleb looked up from the letter, his eyes moving from one woman to the next. Each face told a story of hardship and determination. These weren't random strangers. They were connected to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The baby, he said slowly, the pieces falling into place. They can't be. Ruby, the red-haired woman, crossed her arms defensively. We're not here to discuss that. We're here because your brother promised us protection, and now he can't deliver. Protection from what? Caleb asked, though he already suspected the answer. Violet, the intellectual-looking woman with wire-rimmed glasses, pulled out a newspaper clipping from her bag. The headline made Caleb's stomach drop. Mysterious deaths plague frontier settlements. 6 women have died in the last 2 months, Violet explained. All of them were with child. All of them had connections to the old mining operations. Caleb crumpled the letter in his fist. The silver mine had been closed for 3 years, ever since the fire that destroyed half the mountain and killed dozens of workers. He and Marcus had barely escaped with their lives, and Caleb had sworn never to go back. Someone's cleaning house, Grace, the older woman, said quietly, eliminating anyone who knows the truth about what was really being pulled out of that mine. Which is why we came to you, Sadie, the youngest, added. Your brother said you were the only one who could keep us safe. Caleb laughed bitterly. Safe? Look at me. I'm a broken-down hermit living in a shack. I can barely keep myself alive, let alone protect 6 pregnant women. But even as he said it, Caleb was already thinking tactically. His cabin was defensible, with clear sight lines in all directions. He had weapons cached throughout the property, and he knew these mountains better than anyone. If someone was truly hunting these women, this might be the safest place for them. There's something else, Magnolia said, reaching into her bag again. She pulled out a small pouch and poured its contents into her palm. 6 more silver pendants, identical to the ones they wore around their necks. Your brother said to give you these when we found you. He said you'd know what to do with them. Caleb stared at the pendants, his mind racing back to that terrible night 3 years ago. The mine foreman screaming orders as the tunnel collapsed, the acrid smell of burning timber, the sound of men dying in the darkness below, and the secret they discovered in the deepest shaft, the one that had made powerful men very, very angry. If I help you, Caleb said carefully, I need to know everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. What was really in that mine? The women exchanged glances, and Caleb could see they were holding back something significant. Something that would change everything he thought he knew about that night. But before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley below. Someone had followed them to his sanctuary. Caleb moved faster than he had in 3 years, his survival instincts kicking in like a dormant fire suddenly blazing to life. He grabbed Magnolia's arm and pulled her away from the window. How many riders? He whispered urgently. Ruby peered through a gap in the wooden shutters. 4, maybe 5. They're moving slow, like they're tracking something. Caleb cursed under his breath. His cabin was isolated, but it wasn't invisible. If these women had been followed, then whoever was hunting them had more resources than he'd anticipated. Get away from the windows, he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd once led mining crews through dangerous tunnels. Grace, take the younger ones to the back room. Magnolia, I need you to tell me exactly who knows you came here. We were careful, Magnolia insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. We avoided the main trails, stayed away from settlements. Careful isn't good enough when you're dealing with people who burned down half a mountain to hide their secrets, Caleb snapped. He moved to a loose floorboard and pried it up, revealing a cache of weapons he'd hoped never to touch again. The Winchester rifle felt heavy in his hands, but familiar. He checked the ammunition with practiced efficiency, his fingers remembering skills he'd tried to forget. What exactly did your brother tell you about the mine? Violet asked, her scholarly curiosity overriding her fear. Caleb paused in his preparations. He told me we'd found silver, rich veins that could make us wealthy beyond imagination. He met her eyes. But that wasn't the whole truth, was it? The sound of horses grew closer, and Caleb could hear voices now, rough men calling to each other, coordinating their approach. These weren't random drifters or cattle rustlers. They moved with military precision. The mine wasn't just producing silver, Sadie whispered. her young face pale with terror. "Your brother found something else. Something that certain people would kill to keep secret." "What kind of something?" Caleb demanded, but the answer was cut short by the sharp crack of a rifle shot outside. The bullet splintered the wood near the front door, sending splinters flying. Caleb pushed the women toward the back of the cabin, his mind automatically calculating angles of attack and defensive positions. "This is your only warning," a voice shouted from outside. "Send out the women, and we'll let you live." Caleb positioned himself behind an overturned table, using it as cover while he peered through a gap in the shutters. 5 riders sat their horses in a loose semicircle around his cabin. They were well armed and looked like the kind of men who solved problems with violence. "Can't do that," Caleb shouted back. "These ladies are under my protection now." The apparent leader of the group, a large man with a black beard, laughed coldly. "Your protection? You've been hiding in these mountains like a coward for 3 years. What makes you think you can protect anyone?" The words stung because they carried truth. Caleb had been running, hiding from his failures and his guilt. But seeing these 6 women, understanding that they carried life within them while facing mortal danger, awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead. "Because," Caleb called out, chambering around in his rifle, "I've got nothing left to lose." Another shot rang out, this one punching through the front wall and barely missing Clara, who yelped in fear. The baby in her womb kicked violently at the sound, and she pressed both hands to her belly protectively. Caleb's jaw tightened. These men were willing to risk killing unborn children to get what they wanted. Whatever secret the mine held, it was worth more to them than innocent lives. "You have 10 seconds to come out peaceful-like," the leader shouted. "After that, we burn you out." Caleb checked his ammunition again. He had maybe 20 rounds, enough for a short fight but not a prolonged siege. The cabin's back door led to a narrow trail that wound up into the rocks, but the women would be too slow and visible to make an escape that way. "Magnolia," he whispered. "That mine your brother wrote about. Where exactly is it?" 2 days' ride north," she replied. "But it's been sealed since the fire." "Not sealed enough, apparently," Caleb muttered. The sound of striking matches reached his ears, followed by the whoosh of igniting oil. They were making torches, preparing to follow through on their threat. But as Caleb prepared to make his stand, Grace grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "There's something else Marcus wanted us to tell you," she whispered urgently. "About why these babies are so important. About what we're really carrying." Outside, the first torch sailed through the air toward his roof. The torch landed on the cabin's roof with a crash, flames immediately beginning to lick at the dry wooden shingles. Caleb could smell smoke starting to seep through the ceiling, but his attention was fixed on Grace's urgent whisper. "The babies aren't just random victims," Grace said quickly. "They're all connected to the mine workers who died in the fire. The fathers were all men who knew what was really being extracted from those tunnels." Caleb's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "We're saying," Ruby interjected, her voice tight with fear and anger, "that someone wanted to make sure no children of those miners would ever be born. No heirs to ask questions. No family members to demand investigations." Another torch sailed through the air, this one shattering a side window and setting the curtains ablaze. The attackers were systematically trying to burn them out, forcing them into the open where they could be easily picked off. Caleb moved to the window and took careful aim with his rifle. The leader was still mounted about 50 yards away, shouting orders to his men. At this distance, in good light, it was an easy shot for someone with Caleb's skills. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, and the leader jerked backward in his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Not a killing shot, but enough to make the others take cover behind rocks and trees. "You just made them very angry," Violet observed, trying to stay calm despite the growing smoke in the room. "They were already planning to kill us," Caleb replied, working the bolt action to chamber another round. "At least now they know it won't be easy." Sadie was crying quietly in the corner, one hand on her swollen belly. "This is all my fault. I should never have told them about the pendant." "What pendant?" Caleb demanded, but his question was interrupted by gunfire from outside. 3 rifles opened up simultaneously, sending bullets crashing through the walls and windows. The women huddled together in the back room while Caleb returned fire, trying to keep the attackers pinned down. But the roof fire was spreading quickly, and soon they'd be forced to choose between burning alive or facing the guns outside. "There's something else," Magnolia shouted over the gunfire. "About the mine. Your brother didn't just find silver deposits. Caleb paused in his shooting. Then what did he find? Documents, Grace said. Hidden in a sealed chamber deep in the mine. Papers that proved the territorial government was selling land that didn't belong to them. Land that belonged to the tribes. The pieces began falling into place in Caleb's mind. If powerful men had been stealing tribal lands and selling them to settlers, that was worth killing for. It was worth burning down mines and eliminating witnesses. It was worth hunting pregnant women across hundreds of miles of wilderness. How many people know about these documents? Caleb asked. Besides us? Only your brother, Violet replied. And whoever's been trying to kill us. A new voice shouted from outside, different from the wounded leader. Thornfield, we know you're in there. This doesn't have to be difficult. Just give us the women and walk away. Can't do that, Caleb called back, though he was rapidly running out of options. The fire above was growing louder, and he could feel heat starting to build in the room. Then you'll burn with them, the voice replied. Clara suddenly stood up, her face pale but determined. I know another way out. There's a root cellar under the cabin. It connects to an old mine shaft that runs up into the rocks. Caleb stared at her. How could you possibly know that? Because, Clara said, touching her pendant, my father was one of the miners who helped dig it, before he died in the fire. The cabin groaned ominously as the fire spread across more of the roof. Burning debris began falling through the ceiling, and the smoke was becoming thick enough to choke them. Show me, Caleb said, but as Clara moved toward a trapdoor hidden under a rug, the sound of more horses reached their ears. At least 6 additional riders were approaching fast, their hoofbeats thundering up the valley. Either rescue was coming, or their situation had just become impossible. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 1 p.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Clara had been right. There was indeed a root cellar beneath the cabin, but it was cramped and would barely hold all 7 of them. Get down there now, Caleb ordered, helping Magnolia toward the opening. The smoke was getting thicker by the minute, and burning pieces of roof were beginning to crash down around them. As the women descended one by one into the cellar, Caleb kept watch at the window. The new riders had arrived, but something was wrong. Instead of joining the attack, they had taken positions behind the original attackers. Gunfire erupted suddenly, but it wasn't directed at the cabin. The newcomers were shooting at the men who had been trying to burn them out. What's happening up there? Grace called from below. I don't know, Caleb replied, watching in amazement as the tide of battle shifted completely. The original attackers found themselves caught between the cabin and the new arrivals, outnumbered and outflanked. The wounded leader tried to rally his men, but 2 of them were already down, and the others were scrambling for better cover. Within minutes, the entire attacking force was either dead or fleeing back down the mountain. Caleb waited until the shooting stopped completely before calling out, Who's out there? Friends of your brother, came the reply. Marcus sent us to find the women. One of the riders approached the burning cabin slowly, his hands visible and empty. He was an older man with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in the saddle. Name's Fletcher Knox, the man called out. Marcus hired us to track down these ladies and bring them somewhere safe. Caleb helped the women climb back up from the cellar, though the cabin was now becoming uninhabitable due to the fire. They gathered outside, keeping close together as they faced their unexpected rescuers. How do we know you're telling the truth? Ruby demanded, her hand protectively covering her belly. Fletcher reached into his saddlebag and produced a letter bearing Marcus's distinctive seal. He figured you might be suspicious. Said to give you this. Caleb read the letter quickly. It was definitely from his brother, and it contained details that only Marcus would know about their childhood. But it also contained disturbing news. Marcus has been captured, Caleb announced grimly. He's being held in Broken Ridge by the same people who've been hunting you. Then we need to get him out, Magnolia said immediately. It's not that simple, Fletcher interrupted. Broken Ridge is crawling with hired guns. Maybe 50 men, all loyal to whoever's paying them. A direct rescue would be suicide. Violet adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. Unless we had something they wanted more than Marcus. Like what? Sadie asked. Like the documents he found in the mine, Violet replied. According to this letter, Marcus hid them before he was captured. If we could find them and offer a trade. Caleb shook his head. You're talking about walking into a trap. These people have already tried to kill you once. They'll keep trying until we're all dead, Grace pointed out. At least this way, we'd have some control over the situation. Fletcher's men had finished securing the area and were now approaching the group. They looked like experienced fighters, the kind of men you wanted on your side in a dangerous situation. There's something else, Fletcher said, lowering his voice. Marcus wasn't the only one captured. They've got 3 other miners who survived the fire. Men with families. Men who know the truth about what happened. The implications hit Caleb immediately. If these men talked under torture, it wouldn't matter where the women hid. Their identities would be revealed. Their locations discovered. They would never be safe. How long do we have? Caleb asked. Marcus said they'd start executing prisoners tomorrow at sunset if their demands weren't met, Fletcher replied. Caleb looked at the 6 women, all of them carrying new life, all of them connected to a tragedy that had started 3 years ago with a mine fire. His brother was counting on him to protect them, but protecting them might require risking everything. What exactly are their demands? Magnolia asked. Fletcher's expression grew even more serious. They want the documents, and they want all 6 of you. They're not interested in deals or negotiations. The fire behind them roared louder as more of the cabin's roof collapsed. Soon there would be nothing left of Caleb's sanctuary, nothing left of the life he'd built in isolation. Then we give them what they want, Caleb said quietly. The women stared at him in shock, but before anyone could protest, he continued. We give them exactly what they want, just not the way they're expecting it. Caleb's plan was audacious and dangerous, but it was their only chance. As they rode toward Broken Ridge under the cover of darkness, he explained the details to Fletcher and the women. We're not going to sneak in like thieves, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the group as they moved through the mountain passes. We're going to ride in like we own the place. Magnolia shifted uncomfortably in her saddle, her pregnancy making the long ride difficult. And how exactly does that help us? Because the one thing these men don't expect is for us to come to them willingly, Caleb explained. They're prepared for a siege, for hiding, for running. They're not prepared for a direct confrontation. Fletcher spat into the dust. You're talking about walking into a town full of hired killers with 6 pregnant women. That's not courage. That's suicide. No, Violet interjected, understanding beginning to dawn in her intelligent eyes. It's brilliant. If we approach openly, they'll want to know why. They'll want to hear what we have to say before they act. Ruby pulled her horse closer to Caleb's. And what exactly do we have to say? Caleb reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the small pouch containing the 6 additional pendants that Magnolia had given him. In the moonlight, the silver caught and reflected the pale glow, making them seem almost alive. We tell them the truth, Caleb said. Caleb, we tell them that we have the real documents from the mine. Not copies, not partial evidence, but the complete proof of their land fraud scheme. But we don't have the documents, Sadie pointed out nervously. They don't know that, Caleb replied. And by the time they figure it out, we'll already be inside with Marcus and the other prisoners. The lights of Broken Ridge appeared in the distance, a cluster of flickering flames in the valley below. Even from this distance, they could see men posted as sentries around the town's perimeter. Getting close without being detected would be impossible, but that wasn't the plan anyway. Once we're inside, Caleb continued, Fletcher and his men will create a distraction at the north end of town. Something loud and attention-grabbing. While everyone's focused on that, we get Marcus and the others out through the back of whatever building they're being held in. Grace pulled her shawl tighter against the cold night air. And if your distraction doesn't work, if they realize what we're doing, then we fight our way out, Caleb said simply. But that's why we're going in honest. They'll underestimate us because they think pregnant women can't be dangerous. Clara spoke up for the first time in hours. They're wrong about that. Caleb looked at her with surprise. The youngest of the group had seemed the most frightened throughout their ordeal, but now there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. My father died in that mine fire, Clara continued. My mother died giving birth to me because she had no money for a proper doctor after the mine owners refused to pay compensation. These people have taken everything from us. I'm not afraid of them anymore. One by one, the other women nodded in agreement. Whatever fear they'd carried was being replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Determination. As they approached the outskirts of Broken Ridge, Caleb made a final check of his weapons. The rifle was loaded and ready, his pistol cleaned and primed. But more importantly, his mind was clear for the first time in 3 years. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding from his past or his failures. Tonight, he was going to face the people who had destroyed so many lives, and he was going to make them pay. The first sentry spotted them when they were still 100 yards from town. "Riders approaching!" the man shouted, raising his rifle. Caleb raised his hands, showing he wasn't holding weapons. "We're here to talk," he called out. "We have something your boss wants." The sentry hesitated, then called back to town for reinforcements. Within minutes, they were surrounded by armed men, all of them nervous and trigger-happy in the darkness. The leader of the hired guns was a thin man with cold eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. He studied Caleb and the women with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to violence. "You're either very brave or very stupid," the man said, his hand resting on his gun. "My name's Ezra Blackwood, and I speak for the people who want you dead. Then you can tell your employers that we're here to make a deal," Caleb replied calmly. "The documents they want in exchange for my brother and the other prisoners." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think we're interested in deals? We could just take what we want and kill you anyway." Magnolia urged her horse forward slightly. "Because we don't have the documents with us. They're hidden somewhere only we know about. Kill us, and you'll never find them. And," Violet added, "because those documents contain enough evidence to bring down some very powerful people. People who pay your salaries and expect results, not excuses." Blackwood considered this, then gestured for his men to lower their weapons slightly. "You've got 5 minutes to convince me. After that, we do this the hard way." Caleb dismounted slowly, helping the women down from their horses. Each movement was deliberate and non-threatening, but he could feel the tension crackling through the air like lightning before a storm. "Your employers have been stealing tribal land for years," Caleb began, "selling it to settlers, mining it for silver, making fortunes while the rightful owners got nothing. The mine foreman discovered the scheme by accident and started documenting everything. Ancient history," Blackwood said dismissively. "Not when those documents include names, dates, and bank records," Ruby interjected. "Not when they prove that territorial officials were taking bribes and falsifying land grants." Blackwood's confidence wavered slightly. "You're bluffing." Grace stepped forward, her pendant catching the torchlight. "These belong to the miners who died. Each one contains a small compartment with microfilm copies of key documents. Your people have been killing us to get them back, but you didn't know what they really contained. It was a complete lie, but it was delivered with such conviction that even Caleb almost believed it. The pendants were just silver jewelry, but in the flickering light, they could appear to have hidden compartments. "Prove it," Blackwood demanded. Sadie fumbled with her pendant, pretending to struggle with a hidden mechanism. "They're designed to only open with a specific sequence. If you force them, the film inside burns up from chemical reaction." Blackwood grabbed one of his men by the shoulder. "Go get the prisoners. Bring them out here where I can see them." Minutes later, Marcus was dragged out of a building in the center of town. Even in the poor light, Caleb could see that his brother had been beaten, but was still alive. 3 other men stumbled out behind him, all of them showing signs of rough treatment. "Marcus!" Magnolia called out, and Caleb saw his brother's eyes widen in surprise and concern. "You shouldn't have come," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "It's not safe." "Safe enough," Caleb replied. "We're making a trade." But as he spoke, Caleb caught Fletcher's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. In the distance, barely audible over the conversation, came the sound of horses moving quickly toward the north end of town. Blackwood was still focused on the pendants, trying to determine if the women were telling the truth about hidden compartments. His greed and paranoia were making him careless, exactly as Caleb had hoped. "All right," Blackwood said finally. "You give us the pendants, we give you the prisoners. But if you're lying about those documents—" "We're not lying," Caleb said. "But there's one more thing you should know." "What's that?" Caleb smiled grimly. "We didn't come alone." The explosion that lit up the north end of town was Fletcher's signal. Dynamite charges that he'd placed earlier created a massive fireball that sent armed men running in all directions, thinking they were under attack by a much larger force. In the confusion, Caleb drew his pistol and shot Blackwood before the man could react. The other gunmen were caught between defending against the apparent attack and controlling their prisoners. "Run!" Caleb shouted to the women. "Get to the horses!" Marcus broke free from his guards and tackled one of them. while the other prisoners fought desperately for their freedom. Gunfire erupted throughout the town as Fletcher's men attacked from multiple directions, creating chaos and panic. Caleb fired repeatedly, providing cover for the women as they mounted their horses. Magnolia took a bullet in the arm but stayed in her saddle, her face set with determination. Within minutes, they were racing out of Broken Ridge with Marcus and 2 of the other prisoners. The third man had been shot during the escape, but he died fighting for his freedom, rather than waiting for execution. As they rode hard through the mountain passes, putting distance between themselves and the burning town behind them, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Peace. The past had finally been confronted and defeated. The women were safe, the conspiracy exposed, and the guilty punished. Marcus rode beside him, wounded but alive, and the 6 women carried new life that would grow up free from the shadows of their father's deaths. At dawn, they reached a settlement where a territorial judge listened to their story and examined the evidence they'd gathered. By afternoon, warrants had been issued for the arrest of the officials involved in the land fraud scheme. The pendants, it turned out, really were just silver jewelry, but the truth they represented was more valuable than any mind could produce. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where justice and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.